This week on Government Matters.
I hope upon further reflection, my friends and colleagues in the Senate will see their way clear to adopting this important reform legislation as part of their own in their version of the defense bill. And they can get that done this week.
The very latest on FATARA, my one-on-one exclusive with Congressman Gerry Connolly.
It's hard to do, and the expenses of actually creating advanced identity solutions that can verify somebody on the other end are really too much for any one agency to bear.
The federal government builds an identity ecosystem through NSTIC.
Unless we reverse sequestration, that's going to continue, and it'll grow, and we'll get even more cuts.
The fiscal cliff for university R&D. Government Matters starts right now.
From ABC 7 and News Channel 8, this is Government Matters.
Thanks for joining us. Government is the engine that runs this city. That's why Government Matters. Every Sunday, we'll bring you the week's top headlines in tech, security, and management. I'm your host, Morris Jones. Topping headlines this Sunday, the glimmer of hope for a budget deal. House and Senate Budget Committee chairs Paul Ryan and Patty Murray are focusing on a potential pact. It leaves politically toxic proposals like taxes off the table. OMB Director Sylvia Matthew Burwell told Politico she's cautiously optimistic that Congress will set new spending levels and replace some cuts mandated by sequestration.
I think there have been some lessons from what happened with the shutdown. And the fact that, yes, government does do things that people think are important, and that's not a way to run a railroad.
Soon the FBI will be moving its longtime headquarters out of Pennsylvania Avenue. Now it appears the agency will move out of the district altogether. The Washington Post reports site requirements for a new location effectively eliminate D.C. from contention. The General Services Administration requires the new building to be within 2.5 miles of the Beltway, 2 miles of a metro stop, and encompass 50-plus acres. Poplar Point, the city's choice for a new location, only meets the first two criteria. Let's take a quick look now at some of the week's top defense headlines. President Obama has appointed Christine Fox to serve as acting Deputy Secretary of Defense. She's the first woman to hold the #2 job at the Pentagon. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel calls Fox a brilliant defense thinker. Meanwhile, Hagel detailed his plan to reorganize staff and trim the budgets of various civilian defense headquarters. He says cutting 20% of Pentagon staff will save at least $1 billion over 5 years. International development companies, or IDCs, fill a critical role in the federal contractor landscape. They do business with the U.S. government through USAID, the Agency for International Development. This week, those two worlds met in Washington. Hatzavella has more.
They've been working down in Colombia for a decade, called Tetra Tech, a for-profit international development company, one of many that works with the United States Agency for International Development.
One of our hallmarks of our work there has been trying to build a responsive local government that meets the citizens' needs.
Jen Allman is the president. This week, he and other international development company leaders, as well as reps from USAID, met to talk about how they can continue to evolve and how to better work together for the same goal.
By eliminating poverty, having economic opportunity, hopefully contributing to not only global security, but our own national security here in the United States. It's also the right thing to do, not only for humanitarian grounds, but to assure that there are livelihoods and that people have a healthy, safe environment to live in, and that we're all aspiring to equitable social, political, and economic development.
In Colombia, they say they have created thousands of jobs and helped improve social infrastructure by building schools, clinics, and water systems.
The success of our work in Colombia, in my opinion, is truly tied to the level of partnerships that exist in Colombia.
In spite of federal budget challenges, Allman says robust levels of funding shows there's still solid support by the administration, Congress, and the American people. Allman, who's part of the Council of International Development Companies, strongly believes the U.S. should be actively engaged in the world, not just militarily, but in an international development context. Companies like Tetra Tech help in that effort.
They can speak the corporate language, they can help manage effectively, so they're really key players in this whole process.
Beneficial at home and abroad.
There's definitely a mutual and shared interest between those countries and ours, and that's why this is all really important at the end of the day.
And you can see it happening in Colombia. In Washington, Hatzavella for Government Matters.
The Federal Aviation Administration is slowly moving forward with guidelines on unmanned aerial vehicles. Congress wants them to grant drones access to U.S. skies by September of 2015. But the agency is behind schedule. Now Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos is pushing the envelope, as Laura Spencer reports.
Forget FedEx, UPS, and even your trusty old-fashioned mail carrier. Amazon's big announcement to use drones to deliver packages has everyone talking. And while they may be the biggest name to take to the sky, other businesses are way ahead. From a mom-and-pop dry cleaner in Philly promising to dry your suit in the wind, to pizza chain Domino's offering to fly your pie to you. And though Amazon still is not taking to the skies for a few more years, other countries are already trying it out. Here in China, a Shanghai bakery is taking cake delivery to new heights. In Australia, they're developing a drone to deliver textbooks to your door. And in South Africa, they've found a way to deliver beer to thirsty concert goers. Back here in the States, drones are already being used by real estate agents to take photographs and by farmers to manage their crops. But realistically, it may be a while before these guys are showing up at our doors. At Purdue University, where they're developing the type of drones that Amazon would use, they are experiencing some turbulence along the way.
We've crashed the first 3 times we took off.
A crash course that could one day become a high-flying success.
Laura Spencer. We'll turn from headlines to tech straight ahead on Government Matters. Next week, the Senate will consider its version of a defense spending bill. The measure could include a major piece of IT legislation. My exclusive interview with FITARA co-sponsor Gerry Connolly next. In Tech Matters, an update on the Federal IT Acquisition Reform Act. 4 months ago, I interviewed Republican Representative Darrell Issa. He co-sponsored the bill in the House. This Sunday, I sit down with his counterpart, Democratic Congressman Gerry Connolly, who says he hopes the Senate passes FITARA this week. Let's talk about where FITARA is today. What's the latest?
Well, the Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act, it's a mouthful, FITARA, was adopted unanimously by both our committee in the House and on the floor of the House as part of the Defense Authorization Bill. We're now waiting for the Senate to take action on its counterpart bill, and we're hoping FITARA will be in their version of the defense bill as well.
Let's talk about the price tag. The Congressional Budget Office estimates FITARA would cost $145 million through 2018. In this era of austere budgets, does that concern you?
No. What bothers me, frankly, is how the Congressional Budget Office puts on green eye shades and only looks at one narrow factor. So what's the cost to administer the bill? They say over the next 5 years it's $140 million. Now, what they don't give us any credit for is if this bill works, and we believe most certainly it will save billions of dollars a year. Because we spend $82 billion a year on federal IT acquisition. $82 billion a year. If we save a fraction of that, it more than offsets whatever the administrative cost CBO has. But unfortunately, because of the CBO sort of head in the sand methodology, they only score the cost, which are minimal, as you can tell, over 5 years, and give us zero credit for the savings, which will be huge.
This week, Erica McCain, a federal procurement lobbyist, suggested FITARA isn't ready for prime time. She thinks Congress should move ahead with individual provisions that have industry consensus and roll out the rest of the bill into a broader dialogue on IT acquisition reform. Ultimately, do you envision one bill for CIO authority, another bill for data center optimization, and so on?
That could happen. We could break apart the bill into its different parts. I don't think that's a wise approach, given the productivity or lack thereof here in Congress. Remember, this Congress has only passed 49 bills into law this year. So the idea that we're going to pass 6 or 7 in terms of IT acquisition, maybe that's a good idea, but it's never going to happen, Morris. So that's why we put it all together in one bill to have one major comprehensive reform that will make a difference in federal IT acquisition and save taxpayers money.
Last month, you told Federal News Radio that the botched rollout of healthcare.gov helped to galvanize support for FITARA. How would your bill help prevent future problems with IT management?
If you look at the website rollout, it didn't have a project director. Our bill would require a project director. No one's in charge. Is it the Chief Information Officer at HHS? Is it the Secretary of HHS? Is it the head of CMS? Is it their Chief Information Officer? Is it the one at the White House? Who is it? We have 250 people over 24 agencies called CIO. Our bill would actually invest authority in one CIO per agency, where all of that responsibility would lie. That person would have flexibility, but also accountability, and would be able, frankly, to make key decisions without going through the cumbersome federal regulatory process the President himself referred to as a burden on the website override.
Last month, FedScoop named you Tech Champion of the Year. Congratulations. What's next for you?
You know, I ran for Congress to get something done. I'm not interested, frankly, in moving into leadership. I care a lot about the two committees I'm on. I care about the community I represent, and that community is a high-tech community. It partners with the federal government. It's employed by the federal government. It contracts for the federal government, and those are issues and concerns I want to tend to, and that's why I was very proud of that award. Obviously, I'm making some mark in the realm of high-tech, which I think very much reflects the kind of district I represent.
Congressman Gerry Connolly, thank you.
Morris, thank you so much.
We'll turn from tech to security straight ahead on Government Matters. The White House wants to create what it calls an identity ecosystem. What does that mean, and is NSTIC the answer? We'll talk to the man behind that pilot program next. In security matters, the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. That's NSTIC for short. Since 2011, officials set up a dozen pilot programs in the private and public sectors. They also want federal agencies to adopt identity management systems. This Sunday, a progress report. Joining me now with an update on Government Matters is Jeremy Grant. He's the Senior Executive for Identity Management at NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Jeremy, what is NSTIC and how does it work?
Well, NSTIC is the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace. It's an initiative that was signed by President Obama in April of 2011, focused on coming up with a marketplace of solutions that can raise the level of trust online every place that Americans go. In simple terms, that means bringing together stakeholders, whether they're in the technology industry, the financial sector, the health sector, advocates for privacy and civil liberties, to come together to try and sort out a better way to manage our identities online and give people more choices in lieu of the passwords that we use today.
Now, in September, your agency announced more than $7 million in NSTIC grants. The list of recipients includes Privo, a McLean, Virginia-based firm that helps websites follow online privacy laws for kids. What do you hope to learn from these pilot programs?
Well, the focus of the pilots is really on trying to help seed the marketplace with more trusted identity solutions. And by that, I should say, we mean solutions that aren't passwords, which, if you look at studies, show that 76% of all network intrusions last year were tied to passwords. It's a very weak technology. I can't even call it a security technology. It's time to move to something that's better. What Privo and the other pilots are really looking at is a way to start piloting the use of more advanced identity solutions that you could use in lieu of passwords. Privo is particularly focused on kids. There's a tremendous amount of rules and regulations that websites have to deal with if they are dealing with a child who's under the age of 13. The problem is, if you look at the old New Yorker cartoon where the dog says to his friend the dog on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog on the internet. Right. If I'm Facebook or Google or a kid's toy site, how do I know that the person who says that he's 19 years old isn't in fact an 8-year-old boy?
Exactly.
So trusted identity solutions are needed really there and in a bunch of other different environments to help make types of transactions that aren't available online today more readily available.
Everything in life boils down to a New Yorker cartoon, one way or the other. Now the White House is in the middle of a push to get federal agencies to adopt NSTIC. Howard Schmidt, the White House cyber coordinator, addressed that issue during a workshop last March.
We put out a memo to all the government agencies that said effectively, don't continue to build and support identity ecosystems within your organizations. Start accepting outside credentials.
So, Jeremy, for federal agencies, has the switch been a tough sell?
I wouldn't say it's been a tough sell. You know, almost every agency has got 3 or 4 killer apps that they'd like to put online, but they simply can't because they haven't had an easy way to sort out how, if you figure out, is the person at the other end of a transaction really that proverbial dog on the internet or not. It's hard to do, and the expenses of actually creating advanced identity solutions that can verify somebody on the other end are really too much for any one agency to bear. What's been helpful have been efforts that we've been helping to facilitate along with a number of different federal agencies to actually come up with a shared infrastructure, in this case the Federal Cloud Credential Exchange as it's known, that agencies can share so that if I am, say, a veteran who's now back from Iraq and in college, and I also happen to be a taxpayer, when I log into the VA, federal student aid, and the IRS, I don't have to get a separate credential each time. This kind of shared infrastructure, it's good for the taxpayer because it saves money and it makes it a lot easier for citizens to access a new range of online services that they can't do today.
It's a great program. We wish you luck with that. Jeremy Grant with NIST. Thanks for being with us on Government Matters.
Thank you.
In Management Matters, the fiscal cliff for university R&D. A just published report finds the U.S. lags behind other developed nations in university research funding and shows no signs of improvement. That could have a chilling effect on innovation and long-term economic growth. For more, we turn to our guest on Government Matters, Dr. Robert Atkinson, president of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. Let's open with some of the statistics gathered for this report. You find that of 39 nations, the U.S. ranks 24th in government funding and 27th in business funding as a share of gross domestic product. Why is that such a big concern?
Well, look, the U.S. economy thrives on innovation. That's how we're going to be able to outcompete the Chinas of the world, the Indias of the world, the Brazilians of the world. And yet, a lot of our innovation now is coming from universities. But if we aren't funding it enough, if we're not providing the seed corn, if you will, in 5 years or 10 years, we're just not going to have the innovation, the knowledge, the research coming out of our universities that our private sector and our entrepreneurs can then capitalize on to create jobs.
Let's get to some of the causes behind low U.S. rankings. Here's a quote. Federal investment in university R&D as a share of GDP has increased, albeit by a small amount, nearly every year over the past decade. The more important cause of the decline was state governments. So, Rob, state governments are a big part of the problem. Won't that aspect take care of itself as the economy heals and sales taxes rise?
No, because that decline in state government funding has been going on for over a decade. Lots and lots of states now, they look at research support as something they just can't afford to do. It benefits the entire country, not just their own state necessarily. So they've been, in some states, been cutting back as much as by half over the last decade. Now our data only goes up to 2011. That's the latest international comparative data. I guarantee you if we did this report in 2 years, we would see a cut in federal funding for university R&D because of the sequester and other kinds of cuts. So we're not just seeing state cuts, but we're going to also see federal cuts.
So enter sequestration. How did that impact federal research budgets, and how does it stand to impact them in the future?
Well, potentially this year, in the last year, we're going to be seeing a cut of about 7 or 8% of federal research funding. I recently spoke to a program manager at a defense agency who had to go out and explain to university research teams he was funding that he's going to have to be cutting their funding, not because they weren't doing cutting-edge research, high-quality work for the military, but they just didn't have the money to fund it anymore. And unless we reverse sequestration, that's going to continue and it'll grow and we'll get even more cuts.
Now, Rob, you recommend congressional action, including increasing university research support by $45 billion per year and opening up energy R&D tax credits to other fields. Tell us more.
Well, we have a budget deficit, there's no question about that, but we also have an innovation or investment deficit. So hypothetically, we could help solve the budget deficit if we just eliminated all federal support for science. But that would make our kids' life worse because our children would have not as good health care improvements, other kinds of innovations and economic growth. So we actually have to be putting more money into these kinds of investments. And, you know, we can do that if we decide to prioritize other areas for cuts, like entitlements. In terms of tax credits, many countries now, but at least 10 or 12, give a special extra tax credit to companies that put money into university research. We actually don't. We actually penalize companies in the U.S. that fund university research. So we need to do both of these things. We need to get government putting more money in, and we need to get the private sector to be doing more partnerships with universities.
Very useful information, news you can use. Dr. Robert Atkinson, president of the IT Innovation Foundation. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Morris.
We'll turn from management to final matters straight ahead. Now commentary. Here's Steve Vito of Sage Communications.
Few things focus attention on a weakness in an organization like an embarrassed CEO. The rollout of healthcare.gov was no exception. During his mea culpa, President Obama pinpointed the need for IT procurement reform. The effort is well underway. Congressman Darrell Issa and Gerry Connolly introduced FITARA months ago, and Congressman Mac Thornberry wants to reform procurement in DoD. But let's set realistic expectations. The most often cited obstacles to achieving results from procurement reform are workforce training, tight budgets, and the legacy systems at federal agencies. But I think there's an additional, often unspoken reason, and that's politics. The acquisition workforce needs more training, but that line item took a major hit when political forces curtailed agency spending on travel and conferences. And the political powder keg known as sequestration exacerbates the restraints of tight budgets by forcing agencies to prioritize lowest price over best value. Politics in the form of continuing resolutions and government shutdowns can handcuff federal managers to spending plans they don't agree with. Procurement reform is needed, but in the business of government, politics can trump best business practices. I'm Steve Vito.
And I'm Morris Jones. Your week is filled with other matters. Save Sundays for us.